Now at 16, I'm telling him, Mr. Blocker, I love this acting thing. I'm kissing girls that are 18 and 20, and it's fantastic. And he looks at me and he says, Billy, he says, I'm going to give you some advice right now. He said, you ain't pretty enough and you ain't ugly enough to make it in this business. You might ought to rethink that.
Yet attitude means, how can I proactively change the way I think? How can I proactively increase my life? How can I proactively create better relationships and better work situations for me to enjoy it? And welcome everybody again to the GAP, the Get Attitude Podcast, The Gap, bridging the gap from who you are to who you want to become and bridging the gap from where you are to where you want to go. Hello, my name is Glenn Bill, founder of the University of Attitude, keynote speaker, and author of the international best-selling book, The ABCs of Attitude. I've been fortunate enough to help tens of thousands of people get attitude. Attitude, the secret formula to success in your business and in your life, and this podcast will help you get yours. So let's get some. I want to welcome everybody. Please remember to subscribe, rate, review, and share. And today, we are with the one and only Bill Hart.
We all think in a fight, we know what we're going to do and we're going to prevail. You're going to end up on the ground and you're going to grapple and you're going to get your butt kicked. We don't rise to the level of our expectations. We fall to the level of our training.
Today we're with the one and only Bill Hart. Bill is the author of White Collar Warrior, a coach at Building Champions, a keynote speaker, and the host of the podcast All In. And today we are with this special person, and we're going to be talking about concluding month number 3, about Attitude Booster number 3, Believe in You. Bill, welcome to the Get Attitude Podcast.
Thanks, buddy. So grateful to be here. I've been looking forward to this all week.
All right. Well, you and me both. Let's just talk real quick about the book, The White Collar Warrior. Tell us a little bit about that and give me the proper and extensive title if you want to.
You bet. You bet. Yeah. So White Collar Warrior is the headline, right? That's the big letters in the title. And then the subtitle is Lessons for Sales Professionals from America's Military Elite. And Glenn, what I did is I interviewed Army Rangers, Navy SEALs, and a Top Gun instructor and looked for the parallels in their world and those of us in sales and sales leadership. And there's quite a few.
Interesting. And so what were some of the, what were 2 or 3 of the biggest ones that we should know about or learn about? Or what were 1 or 2 of them that talked about self-belief that maybe you could pull out for us?
Well, I mean, the fundamental one is attitude. Glenn, you wouldn't be surprised to know, and I'm sure you've run across some Navy SEALs and Army Rangers in your career, but you know that you talk to them and they would all tell you the same thing. Marcus Luttrell probably leading the pack with that, author of Lone Survivor. And it's all about attitude being a choice and never quit, right? So when they go through their basic training, BUDS for SEALs and Ranger School for Army Rangers, they would all tell you the same thing. It's not about being the biggest or the strongest or the fastest. It's about a mindset that says, you're not going to kill me, so I'm not going to quit.
Nice, nice. And so, Bill, when you think about attitude, what is the Bill Hart definition of attitude? More importantly, who taught you about attitude the most? How did you get your attitude? So we get to know you a little bit.
It's a great question, man. I would love to tell you it was my folks, and I don't think it was. I think there were elements of that, but you know, when I was in my 30s and had dark hair and a mullet, not real proud of that, but I did. I had met a guy that later became my best man at my wedding, and he really kind of became a surrogate father to me. And I talk about him in the book. His name was Harold Dyke, and Harold one day. So picture this: we're in a company car. We pull up in front of a mall back in the days when people actually walked into malls and didn't order stuff on Amazon. And there was a parking spot right in front, Glenn. And he looks at me and he says, "Just my luck." And I said, what do you mean by that? I mean, people usually say that when something bad happens. And he said, well, you could, but he said, I choose to affirm the good things that happened to me.
Sweet.
And so, yeah, just my luck. So it started with Harold.
I love it. And what did Harold do for a living? Were you guys two sales guys at the time, or what was going on there?
Pretty much, yeah. He was the director of training for Century 21 Corporate in Southern California.
Oh my gosh.
And I was the director of recruiting.
I love it. As a former Century 21 guy of 31 years,
Right.
we're all in the same boat on that. What when you choose to think of the definition of attitude, number one, I'd love to know what your definition is. And in your coaching practice, you talk with a lot of top producers. Obviously, in your keynote speaking, you do too. When you think of attitude, I'd love you to give me, number one, a definition, but number two, one or two people, when you talk to them, you go, man, that guy's got attitude, and how does it manifest itself? What do you look for? How would you describe it so people know what you're looking at?
Yeah, great questions. I don't know how to define attitude. I'm going to defer to you on that because you're the professor here. But here's what I would say, and I'm saying this as a 3-time cancer survivor.
Wow.
Is attitude is a choice, Glenn. You know that. It
Yes.
is. This is not something that, for me, ebbs and flows. I know that, Dr. Viktor Frankl, right, told us this years ago as a Holocaust survivor watching his family wiped out. He said, your attitude is the last of the human liberties that you can choose. And if you remember, he forgave his captors, his Nazi captors, because he said, that's the one thing I can choose. So that's it for me. And I know it is for you, but anyway, I'll stop there before I go to the next one. But that's I won't define it that way, but that's sort of how I package it, if that makes sense.
Well, it's a beautiful quote, and it's the last endearing, right? The last endearing and most endearing human right you have is to do that. So that is very cool. And then the next question I did as a follow-up is, who are the people that you've come across in your life that, you know, and you've already mentioned one of them, Harold Dyke. Give us one or two more examples of people that got attitude, and maybe a quick story about how they struck you and how you knew.
Yeah. So Daniel Harkavy is the founder of Building Champions, a coaching company that he started 25 years ago. He retired young, Glenn. He had done really well in the mortgage industry, retired very young, took a sabbatical for about a year, decided the thing that he wanted to do is he wanted to start a coaching company. This is what he had been doing as an executive, and he wanted to start it before it was cool, right? Before coaching became cool.
That's the name of a book.
Huh?
That's the name of a book, Before Coaching Came Cool. I love that.
I actually use that quote quite a bit. I say I've been coaching before coaching was cool. But anyway, the beautiful thing about Daniel, and he has refined this, but the thing that attracted me to him, I want you to think about this as a man. I think this is unique in a time when the differences between men and women are often minimized. I'm going to go out on a politically incorrect limb here and see how I navigate these waters. When my wife Tony and I first met Daniel and his wife Sherry, Tony asked Sherry, "What is it that you most like or respect about Daniel?" And this is 20 years ago. And she said, "I love that who you see is who you get, whether he's here with us at Morton's Steakhouse or on an airplane flying to Japan or on another part of the continent," meaning he's the same guy all the time. And, you and I have both worked with people who weren't the same guy. And it was like, pilots who are like, and the checklist, step one is wedding ring is off. And you know what I mean? It's like they just show up differently depending on where they are. And so I loved his consistency.
Nice.
I loved that was so attractive to his bride.
Right.
And so, and this is a guy 10 years younger than me, by the way. It's unusual to have a mentor who's younger than you.
Right.
But I immediately saw something in Daniel that I wanted to emulate. And so on the attitude side, here's what he says these days, Glenn, and you'll love this, and I believe that you'll use this and probably quote him. He says, he literally starts every day in prayer and says, "Lord, let me flip the switches on people's hearts to please an audience of one."
Right. Great.
I don't know, man. I don't think it gets much better than that. And so he does. And so when he talks about flipping switches on people's hearts, He talks about being present in conversation, not being distracted by a mobile device, being right there with them and engaging with people. And so you've heard it before when, like my sister said years ago when she met Bill Clinton, for all his foibles, she said, that guy, when you were talking to him, you were the only person in the room.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you don't hear that often, but I think it's one of the greatest compliments we can get, right? In terms of choosing an attitude of being present.
That's fantastic. And so much to be learned there. So much when we look at the biggest mistakes of attitude. When I think about our gappers who are out there walking on the beach or sitting in the car right now listening, this is a great prelude to the questions. Believe in yourself. Sometimes I think the biggest problem that people have not believing in themselves is they're not present with themselves, but they're never present with anyone else. And I'd like to just bridge the gap a little bit from the general conversation of attitude and your attitude ambassadors or mentors, and let's talk about this thing called believe in you. And I'd love to know, in your history, when did you sit down and go, I better start believing in myself if I'm going to bridge the gap from where I am to where I want to be and from who I am to where I want to go? Did you have an experience like that in your life?
Oh, I did, buddy. And I talk about this in the book as well. And I don't say that because I'm pitching the book. It's just it's a seminal story for me, right? There's a column there in my life that I look at it and say, wow, that was pivotal. So it was this strange time. I'm diagnosed with colon cancer at 40.
Ooh.
You weren't even supposed to start looking for that until you were 50 back then, 20 years ago.
Sure.
I got caught in this bizarre situation where I had no health coverage. I had just left one employer, didn't have COBRA coverage, that kind of bridge. And I literally, in that week when I was diagnosed, had no health insurance. And so what that meant was we went through all of our savings. We lost our house.
Yes.
My wife and I had only been married 9 years at that point, and it was devastating. And so finally, at some point, I'm trying to find a gig and trying to figure out how to recreate some income while I'm getting my health back. And so picture this, and this is no knock on this business, but I just want you to picture yourself doing this, Glenn. At 40, pretty successful. I looked in the want ads. Remember the days where want ads were in the newspaper, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, you can sell suits at Men's Warehouse.
Nice.
Yeah. So I went to Men's Warehouse and I interviewed with a guy who was about 15 years younger than me in the back room at a desk that looks like it had come out of the Department of Motor Vehicles, with a bunch of suits hanging on exposed pipes.
Oh my God, Bill. Wow.
I got back in my car, which by the way was an Audi 5000, and there was change. I'm saying this because I remember that car. It had change in the ashtray that was just enough to get me gas to get home.
Mm-hmm.
It was that bad.
Wow.
And that was the time when I said, okay, like, this is it, dude. Jim Rohn talks about having your back against the wall. And this was the moment in time for me,
right,
where I said, it will never be like this again. I have too many relationships. I have too much skill, too much experience. Game on. And that's when I started to connect with people who were influencers. And everything changed for me at that point because I made that decision in that moment.
Sure. And that had to come from self-belief. And so
100%.
and so that is fear and desperation. Sometimes self-belief,
right?
For those of you listening who don't believe in yourself right now, maybe you're not afraid or desperate enough, which is okay, because I'm sure that it's right around the corner. When you look at people that you coach, can you draw on the biggest mistakes that people make with self-belief? Or tell me, when you think about the people you coach, what do they have when it comes to self-belief? In other words, what I'm looking for, our gappers need answers here. They come here for answers. Yeah. What can they do? What can they believe to help start building their self-belief if they don't have it? We're here to bridge the gap for the people that are listening and watching today. on how to increase self-belief. That can be done through lessons and stories. And one of the best coaches in America, Bill Hart. So give us some answers if you can.
Yeah, man. Well, first of all, whatever you're doing, if this is the only way that you know Glenn Bill, like dig deeper, get the book, go to his website, get the tools, because this is an area of study that Glenn has gone deep on, and you will find tools and suggestions and more of these interviews. And I really mean it. Like you're a treasure trove for this kind of stuff. So, so that would be number one. If you're listening and you don't have all his stuff, get all his stuff. The second thing I would say from my experience as a coach is here's what I tell people, Glenn. I tell people, Glenn, how tall are you? You're a tall guy, right?
6'3".
Yeah. So am I. You and I are the exact same size. So if I were coaching you, I would tell you, I see an outline of you that's like 6'8".
Right.
And so what I mean is, I want you to step into what I see. I may be the only person in your life who've ever said that you could do more. Mm-hmm. And so I believe one of the things that you can do is look for somebody who will speak into you, whether that's a coach, a mentor, Glenn. Find somebody who will help you to see what's possible. What I know is a lot of people come to me and, they're paying me $1,000 an hour for coaching. So this is not, there's like this self-selection process before they get to me. They're already doing pretty well, right?
Sure, yeah.
These aren't people who are trying to figure it out. These are people that are already doing well and they want to do better. Mm-hmm. But what I know is very often, whether it's their parents, who, by the way, are people just like you and I, who didn't get owner's manual with kids,
right?
Who did the best we could, and they did the best they could, presumably at the time, may not have ever been those people that poured into them. And if you didn't have a coach, like in a sports environment, or a teacher, or somebody that said, I see something in you, Glenn, I'm telling you, I think it's an epidemic in our country. And I'm not saying like blow fluffy smoke at people.
Sure.
That doesn't mean anything. I mean, Glenn, somebody at some point said something to you. My guess is, because I know you love sports, it might have been an athletic coach. Is that true? Did somebody speak into you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I was for my two, 80%, 90% of everybody we interview, their attitude coaches are their parents. Now, I'm not saying they're good attitude coaches, but that's where we get our attitude coaching from. Yeah. And yes, I was very fortunate. No matter where I was, I've always been fortunate enough to have people that believed in what I did.
Nice.
But I've always operated, and I think most people with a positive outlook operate with this thing called faith and a higher power. Not to get religious. And, I don't care what religion you're in, but ultimately, this thing called faith, this thing called higher power, this thing about connecting in the universe outside of what's going on the ground, is the biggest example of being spoken into in their words. So, your advice is fantastic. Talk to us a little bit more if you can. Give us. Do you help people with self-belief and speaking into them? I understand is fantastic. Any other clinical things you do, or any other examples that you can give our folks on here's a way somebody increased their self-belief?
Yeah, so here's a classic example. These days, I mean, the very fact that we're recording this video not only for audio, or this interview not only for audio but also for video, this video freaks people out. It
Correct.
Does, right?
Right.
I don't like the way I look. I don't like the way I sound. And I got bad news for you. That's the way you look, and that's the way you sound.
Right.
So I look at myself on video. I can see myself right now, and I'm like, wow, I look like a guy with wrinkles and gray hair. I think I'm 38 inside.
Right.
Dark hair, right? So what I know is video is such a great microcosm of this. It's a great example to use in coaching, because video has become such an important tool, Glenn. And what I find is people limit themselves on their use of it because they don't like the way they look or sound. And so what I end up doing is coaching them on pushing through that pain. Like, look, you're going to have somebody on your shoulder that says that. And I am telling you, you can impact your business positively if you start pushing out more video on YouTube, on social media, with whatever the tools are that you use. You've got to start using more video. Then you run into the perfectionist. Right. And the perfectionist says, well, I did 27 takes because I didn't like the way I sound. Then I said, you know what? As a matter of fact, I'll send you this. And if you want to put it in the show notes, feel free. I just went through a wonderful training program with Renee Rodriguez. It's called Amplifii, Amplifii. Highly recommend it. And it's to improve your communication and presentation skills.
Mm-hmm.
So to this perfectionism point, I'm getting up and I'm doing this on the final day. It's 2 days. I'm giving this presentation about all in. This is the name of my podcast. This is kind of how I live my life. Like if you're going to be in, be all in, right? I was signing my books that way, started the podcast with it. And I'm telling this audience, small group, about the all in story. And I say, well, this is my philosophy on life and blah, blah, blah. And Renee interrupts me and he says, okay, coach, tell me about before you were all in.
Right.
And I paused and I said, I mean, you immediately get it. And I said, well, okay, I had a failed marriage and, I've been through some financial crisis. And I start that way and he stops me again. He says, coach, come on. Take me back to before you were all in. And he's not saying it, but he wants me to go back to the steaming pile of whatever that I was at some point, right? And I said,
Sure.
okay, lowest day of my life, worst day of my life. I'm in a company car. I've got one of those bars hanging across the back with all my clothes in it. That's all I'm owning at the moment. I'm driving away from my house with my now ex-wife and my 2 boys standing on the porch, Glenn, huddled, crying as I'm leaving because we've decided to divorce. Worst day of my life.
Right.
Now, I'm saying this on camera with tears because you know how it is as a communicator. It goes right to your vocal cords, right? And I'll send you the video. You'll see it. And I kind of eke it out. But then I transitioned to, but I made a decision. And it was in that moment that I decided that I was going to be all in. And now I've been married to the same woman for 29 years. My best friend in life. We laugh together. My life is so much richer because of the relationship that we have. I'm all in my faith. So my Lord and Savior, that's what it's all about for me. Like, that's what drives me. If you ask me what drives me, I don't know if you can see it on this rock, but it says, I wrote this 9 years ago. It says, live his plan.
I love it. That's cool.
Right? It's not my plan. Not my plan. It's like he gave me the gifts. What am I supposed to do with this stuff? So my point simply is video is such a cool microcosm that push through the pain if you don't like the way you look and sound. And if you're a perfectionist, be a little imperfect, because that video that I described where I start emotionally, it's had more interaction than almost any video I've ever recorded, because I'm not trying to be like, this is Peter Jennings on the evening news. And I'm not trying to be perfect. I'm just being real.
Right. I've seen the video. It spoke to me. You can't help but have it speak to others. It's extremely powerful. I saw it and it's good. I didn't want to interrupt you because the story is so powerful. The point that you made though, and tons of information, right, in that rant, and I love push through the pain, because here's the problem: most people that are listening to this podcast who don't have the self-belief are always saying to themselves, "Why didn't I just do it?" You know, the great Les Brown said there's 2 people that sit in your chair, that who you are and that who you wish to be. And the only thing holding you back is the pain that it takes to push through it, a la Bill Hart. And so the lesson here, Gappers, in this podcast is do a self-analysis, do a self-inventory and say, number 1, am I pushing through the pain in my life? And is my lack of self-belief because I haven't gone through the pain to push? And Jim Rohn, as you know, when we talk about the activity and the labor, and he says in most unique experiences for half of our audience, they go through this thing called labor and labor pain. So what we need to understand is one way, and as funny as this may sound, and I think what you're suggesting is the only way to increase self-belief, self-worth, and self-relevance is you're going to have to do some things you don't want to do.
Totally.
And you don't need to be perfect. So that is extremely good advice. We do this little thing called Knowledge Through the Decades, Bill. We're going to take you back through your life, and we're going to ask you the attitude lesson that you've learned as you've gotten to the ripe young age. May I tell everybody your age?
Oh, yeah.
73. No, 64.
Wow.
I know.
couldn't hear you.
It's
Could you
right.
say that again?
It's only going to be 9 years. It's like, oh my God, things happen quick. Bill is 64, and he's going to walk us through his life and give us some of his most unique and profound attitude movements. So what I want you to think about, Bill, is the day you were born. I'm sure you probably don't remember. I'm sure you might know the year. And if you can't remember the most profound attitude lesson from your birth, maybe you can think about the birth of your child or somebody you care about. When you think about coming out of the womb and beginning it all, what's the greatest attitude lesson that you can get from a newborn baby?
Yeah, man, I got nothing on my life. But if we go 0 to 10, I can tell you in that window something that I learned from my sister that's 12 years older than me. Is I would always tell people that I had the greatest upbringing and it was fantastic. And I grew up in this upper middle class home in Miami. My dad was in the advertising business. It was like Mad Men without the sex.
Wow.
Yeah, for him.
Right.
But my sister says, she says, so it's funny that that's what you remember, because here's the reality. Mom and dad smoked and drank all the time, and you spent most of your time in a playpen. And I'm like, really? Because that's like how I remember it. So something happened with me early on where it was like all I saw was the good stuff, and I'll take it, given a choice.
That's good. And boy, is that interesting. Look at many of us from our generation,
right?
We're being driven around with both parents smoking, windows up, 12-ounce beer between their crotch.
Exactly.
And we would drive to Florida that way, right? So,
totally.
Right. So I think, the lesson is things change, and I think our generations have maybe gotten cleaner and smarter since we've been growing up, right?
That's right.
And certainly I think the other attitude lesson is there may be things you don't remember that you don't need to remember, and that's okay, right?
I think that's it.
So let's jump to 10 years old. I don't know if you can remember being in third grade, but what we look for there is what was the attitude lesson you learned as a third or fourth grader? Might have been on the playground, may have been from a porch, might have been from your parents. But if you can remember being 10, what do you remember about that time that could be an attitude lesson?
Such a funny thing that you bring up, because I never talk about this. So I live in Miami.
Think that you said that. See, Gittimer always says, whenever you can ask a question, and this is for your salespeople, and I think you've heard me say this, when your prospect goes, wow, nobody's ever asked me that before, then you're right on. So go ahead. I can't wait to hear this.
Yeah. So I grew up in Miami, and I don't know if you remember, and your listeners that are, below 45 will have no idea what I'm talking about, but there was a TV show called Flipper, shot at Ivan Torres' studio in Miami, and it was about a dolphin, right? And so I tried out for the part of Bud, and I didn't get the part. So this was the son, if you remember, right? I was a toe-headed kid. I'm turning back into a toe-head, apparently. But I was a little blonde kid with a good tan and a Hang 10 t-shirt, if you remember those, right? So I tried out for the part, didn't get it, but started doing some commercials. And so what that did for my self-esteem, I'm not saying this is like fantastic, but it began to build my internal image of, okay, I could be that guy. I could do that thing. And if I can jump forward now and take you to kind of the end of that era, now we moved to now we moved to LA. And I'm in John Burroughs Junior High School, and I am friends with Dan Blocker's son, David. Dan Blocker was Haas on Bonanza.
No way.
And I am in his house one day, and he is wearing overalls with no shirt. And if you can picture this guy, all he's got is fur coming out from under the overalls, right?
Oh my God.
And I am now in an acting class, because now at 16, I'm telling him, Mr. Blocker, I love this acting thing. I'm kissing girls that are 18 and 20, and it's fantastic. And he looks at me and he says, Billy, he says, I'm going to give you some advice right now. He said, you ain't pretty enough and you ain't ugly enough to make it in this business. You might ought to rethink that. Kid you not. And it's like,
that's a classic line.
But it was like the best advice, Glenn, because I was not enter the name of the most handsome man that comes to mind.
Elvis.
I was not that guy.
Right.
Right? Glenn Bill. I was not Glenn Bill. Didn't have that going for me.
Yeah.
I was not Dan Blocker, who was a character actor, right? He was a big guy, kind of an ugly mug. That was his point. If you're super handsome or you're a character actor, you're going to be good. But if not, you're just going to get lost in a sea of actors. And so in that moment, I said, yeah, I'm out.
Interesting.
And so then I made a choice when I was 18 that I was going to pursue a career in aviation. And the reason, you probably have no idea that this is true, but that's why that airplane is there.
Sure.
And they're all over my office, is because I fell in love with aviation. And right now I'm speaking to you that are mothers. You have more influence on your kids, specifically your sons, than you realize. Here's what my mom said to me at 18. I graduated high school. I'm sitting at home one day and doing nothing, right? Doing nothing. And she looks out the window. We live in Southern California now. And she said, you know, if I were a young man like you on a day like this, I'd go over to the Burbank airport and find out what it would take to learn to fly. And I thought, it's a great idea. Now, 99% of the time my mother would make a suggestion, I would say, that's a horrible idea, right? But this one, it was like, okay, that's a pretty cool idea. And Glenn,
Wow.
I went there and I took an introductory lesson and fell in love with aviation. Now, I knew my parents weren't going to pay for this. They weren't going to pay for any of this. I had to pay for it.
Right.
But what that did is it flipped the switch in my head that said, from an attitude perspective, if I want to be a pilot,
Right.
I got to go get a job. I got to figure out how to pay for this. And so that started the career that moved me into my 30s now, if we go down that path, where I was selling airplanes.
Oh my gosh.
So I hadn't become a professional pilot, but I was selling airplanes at Beechcraft West at the Van Nuys Airport. My claim to fame is I sold a Bonanza to Bruce Jenner when he was a guy.
Wow.
Well, you know,
how about that?
It was different then. He was on the Wheaties box, and everybody wanted to be Bruce
Jenner a plane,
right?
That's something, man.
When he was a guy. I'm just saying, it was a little different day.
Do you ever watch that and go, "Oh my God"? I mean, wow,
oh, dude,
crazy.
I don't watch it, but
I'm working on getting him booked on the Attitude podcast.
You should.
Yeah,
you should.
I have a good friend.
He's got an amazing story, man, and that guy gave in to. I mean, can you imagine the torment? That's got to be unbelievable internal torment to finally make that gender switch.
Yeah.
And he was the most amazing athlete of his time. And the tail number on his airplane was 8618 X-ray. And I remember that because it was his score in the decathlon. If you remember,
8186.
He was that guy, right? He
Yeah.
won the decathlon. He was on the cover of the on the front of the Wheaties box. Like, he had arrived. So anyway, man, that now moves me into my 30s and 40s, and I don't know how far you want to move into that, but that moved me into sales.
That's very good. So the bottom line is from newborn, hey, guys, you may or may not remember, and it doesn't really matter. Number two, when you were 10 years old, is that you really ought to gauge your talent. You're either the absolute best or the absolute worst, and if you're not one of the two, you're going to have to work your ass off to make yourself distinguishable. In the words of Scott McCain, right? Being distinguishable.
Perfectly
and then
said.
in your 20s, I think the attitude lesson was this: you better get a job if you want to get what you want to get, right? It's if you want to have more, you need to get a job. I think.
Yep.
Great attitude lesson, and not a lot of people, especially today. I have 3 millennial kids. I love them. They're all hard workers, all employed. It's good. But sometimes I feel like telling people, get a freaking job and work hard, because it's not going. So many people feel entitled that, with the people you coach, and I coach a lot of execs, and we giggle about how people come into the interview and how entitled they are as they're interviewing, and they're going, well, how many leads will you be giving me?
Right.
I can go work for an internet mortgage company and they just give me leads.
Totally.
And I go into real estate. It's so much about giving and not getting. So I love the attitude lesson on when 20 is, if you want something, go get a job and make it happen. Then at 30, At 30, you were selling airplanes, so let's just revisit that very quickly. What's the attitude lesson when you're selling aviation equipment? Like who was your sales manager, and what piece of advice did he give you on selling planes? That had to be awesome.
He was a piece of work, man. This guy's name was Jack Miller.
Okay.
I'm right back into the nicotine addiction. He smoked like crazy, but this is the whatever late 70s, early 80s. But I'll tell you, he was an amazing sales guy, and he taught me really almost everything that I know about sales. And dude, he was old school,
Love it.
rough around the edges, but smooth when he needed to be.
Uh-huh.
And the thing that I learned from him more than anything else is the way that you show up, the way that you present yourself, right? And so what I did is I got a license to teach people in ground school. So I was teaching people that were learning to fly
There you
in
go.
our club. It was called the Beach Aero Club. So these are people that have money
Yes.
who want to learn to fly. And his philosophy was, Bill, if you teach them ground school, not flight instruction,
Sure.
you teach them ground school, they're going to trust you enough that when it comes time to buy that $250,000 airplane, they're naturally going to gravitate when you take them out for that Buffalo Burger in Catalina, which is what we did, by the way, because it was a 15-minute flight. Like that was the close.
Wow.
You gotta love this.
Yeah.
Like, well, yeah, I gotta have this airplane for sure. But it was all about how you present, how you show up, and creating trust. And we did that through training.
Yeah, and that's like the story of the cash register. I think it was Mr. Patterson who sold cash registers.
That's right.
Right, all over America. But the first thing he wanted to do was create the need for a receipt. Right? So he created the receipt in order to sell all the cash registers. And that really comes down to give value first. And for our gappers out there, the question is if you're not selling enough, what are you doing before the sale? Before you ask for the sale? The definition of value, we've always said it's what you do for your customer on behalf of your customer before you ask for the sale. And the question is, most low producers, the answer is nothing. Oh, I do nothing for the customer. So what are you doing for that? So that gets you that gets us to 30. And then I think we're going to get a little attitude lesson from when you turn 40. Do you remember your 40th birthday, and what was the attitude lesson when you turned 40?
Yeah, well, it was a few years before, so it was that moment when I went through the divorce, and it was just like, it was the humility lesson.
Right.
It really was, because up until then, Glenn, it had all been just upward trajectory, and it was the smackdown, and here's what it felt like to me. There's a scene in the movie Chicago, ill-fated movie Chicago, based on the play.
Sure.
Where Richard Gere plays an attorney, and he's talking. I don't know if you remember seeing this or not, but it's
Great
worth
movie.
seeing for this scene.
I actually loved it.
Okay, yeah, I agree with you, but most people didn't, right? If you look at the ratings,
I'm a Broadway guy. Love Broadway.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a moment where he's communicating to the jury, and I forget what it is, but some new information comes in, and you can tell he's not prepared for it as an attorney. And literally, all the lights go down, and the light comes on him, and he starts tap dancing. Right. That's what I had done my whole life. My whole life was, I'm tall, I got a good smile, I'm quick on my feet.
Sure.
And that had served me really well. And then I realized, dude, you had been living a life of superficiality, and now you have to make a decision to go deep. And that's when I went through the divorce and made some decisions about the way I was going to show up in my engagement with my God and, everything else. That's when it all changed for me. It was the humbling of Bill Hart through the realization that I had been living a superficial life.
And the lesson there also is we've seen the dance before. Everybody in your life, hey, he's tap dancing again.
Totally.
And you can't dance forever because you get tired. You get worn out. So wow, very, very powerful lesson for our listeners today. If you're the tap dancer, if humility needs to come up, grow or die we'll be hearing that week 8 or month number 8 of this podcast. You just heard a great story of a person that understood about growing or dying, and sometimes you got to die to grow, and sometimes it's not there. So now you turn 50 and things are starting to turn around for you, right? 14 years ago. And you're like, holy crap, I'm 50. I never thought I'd be here. Give us, I don't know if you remember your 50th birthday, but if you did, tell us the attitude lesson when you turned 50. What's that attitude lesson 14 years ago that we can take?
So I was 4 years into this career of coaching, and I was just starting to, hadn't hit it yet, but I was just starting to really kind of own my stuff.
Yeah.
Is the word I'll use.
Cool.
What I mean is I was stepping into the role of being a coach. I feel like I owe people refunds for the first 2 years of coaching, maybe 3, because I was giving little mini keynote talks,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not coaching.
Mm-mm.
And so what I was learning, which you probably learned much faster than me, it took me a while, is I used to print out on my monitor. It was right above the camera here on my monitor, and it would say, let them complete their thoughts out loud. Because Glenn, I would jump on them. It wasn't active listening, and I was just solving problems. And what I realized around that 50 mark is just being quiet, being present, and really listening to people. And I mean like the energy behind the words, not just the words. Like, where is this person really coming from? That allows me to engage at a very different level. Today, I had a conversation with a woman that'll earn $1.8 million this year. And I realized that the thing she was looking for in coaching is something she hadn't spoken because she didn't know it. And I asked her the question, you'll appreciate this in your business. I said, so let me ask you a question. How much is enough?
Right.
And she got really quiet. And I said, if we're going to coach, I think that's what we need to work on. Like, on my terms. I want you to write these 3 words down. On my terms. If you can define that for me, I can help you get there. But if you can't define it, I don't know that I'm going to be able to bring you any value as a coach.
That is so good, Bill. And honestly, for those of us with 15 to 30-year-old children, probably the best advice ever. Let them finish their dumb ass statements.
Right.
And then we can help them. And then we can help them.
Exactly.
But it's so painful.
Exactly.
I was I got a little place at a trailer park up in Monticello, Indiana, and an old Vietnam veteran who I love, who I count as a mentor, who doesn't charge me, that coaches me, lives in a simple house. And he looked at me and he goes, God damn, Glenn. He goes, how much is enough for you? How much do you need? Leg shot to hell, wears long pants on 110-degree days because he doesn't want to see it.
Yeah.
And, I stopped and paused. Took me all summer to figure it out.
Yeah.
Tough question, but a great one. So now we're going to finish this sucker up, and that's going to get us to age 60, which was just 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Tell me, I mean, that's now you're dialing in the book, you're keynote speaking, you're coaching, you got, white collar warrior working. I'm sure that was brewing right at 60. And then, man, you finally did it like we all did. Oh my God, I finally wrote the book. And then everybody's like, when are you writing your next one? I'm like, oh my God, let me marinate and relax on the next one. But what's to finish it off, man, what's the attitude lesson from a guy that's 60?
So there's a poem that is read in a movie called Act of Valor. I don't know if you remember that, but it was a movie that had real life Navy SEALs in it. And in it, Rourke Denver, the actor, who's a Navy SEAL, is reading this Indian's poem that says that there is a sad day in a warrior's life, and it's when you realize men no longer fear you. And that hit me about 60, that I had done a Spartan race with my son, and I was feeling pretty full of myself, like, this is awesome, I'm in best shape of my life. But I realized, you know what, this is a new season, and you just need to embrace it. And so the way that I look at it, Glenn, for a man's life, I don't know how this is for a woman, but for a man's life, I believe you're the student, you're the warrior, and then you're the senior statesman. And I've arrived in senior statesman land, and I dig it. I love it because people, their hunger for wisdom is like intoxicating. I want to be able to share wisdom, and I kind of don't have anything to prove, if that makes sense.
Sure.
It's a cool place to be. I told somebody yesterday, I said, my career has never been better, ever. My relationship with my bride is unbelievable. My relationship with God is incredible. Like, I wouldn't trade 64 for 34.
Right.
Any day of the week. I love where I'm at. I'm blessed.
Well, I can tell you that you've been a powerful guest, Jason. This guy has been one of our best. There is so much wisdom in your call. and letting us have access to you and access to your life from when you were a kid up to now is great. I can't help but think when you talk about being a statesman, when I was a new salesperson, just as you were, how you used to soak up, when you talk about Jack Miller and when you talk about Harold Dyke and when you talk about Daniel Harkavy, that information, that new information that is life-changing, what it can do for you. So I believe that our Gappers got some life-changing information from you. We are very, very thankful for you. If there's one last message that you would like to give our Gappers on attitude or believing in yourself, please let us know. And then please let us know how people can find you and get to you if they'd like to get more of the great Bill Hart.
You bet, man. Well, buddy, this has been a pleasure. I mean, this has been fun. The fact that it's recorded makes it awesome.
Thank you.
I love that this is an actual product that people can listen to, including me. Yeah, the final thing that I would say is it's the name of my podcast. And I really mean this. If you're going to be all in, and everybody nods their head at that. But what I'm saying is, if you're here, if you're walking this planet, if you're breathing oxygen through your nostrils, grasp all the gusto you can. Go for it right now. Awesome. Every adage you've ever heard is true. Life is not a dress rehearsal. This is it. Mm-hmm. Go get it. Get some.
All right. Well, that's why we're here. We're helping people get from who they are to who they want to be, from where they are to where they want to be, and we're helping everybody get some, especially get some attitude. Bill Hart, you're the best. I appreciate you. Your clients are lucky to have you, and we'll continue to follow you. Go to Bill Hart at what is it? Building Champions. Bill Hart at Building Champions if you want to take a look at his website. God bless your bride.
You can find me anywhere on social. God bless you, my brother.
Yeah,
Thanks for this opportunity.
One of the greatest things, Bill loves his wife so much, and I get his posts, and I've told you this before. It's admirable how you treat her and how much you love her. So if you really want to get attitude, make sure you love your spouse. And for that, this is Glenn, Bill, and Bill Hart signing off on the Get Attitude Podcast.